what happens when we inhale mold. Like, I'm just really fascinated about how mold affects the body exactly, like on a cellular level, and the symptoms you might have. It creates some ahas in your own body, you know, or you're a little nicer to yourself when you understand it. It's not just mold, right? There could be spores, there could be mycotoxins, there could be cell fragments, there could be other bacteria from the home, and probably a complex array of toxins that are in your home from mold, and it can be from chemicals and other things. So let's use the example of somebody who's been out of mold, because once you're out of mold, you become more sensitive to it when you smell it again, right? So let's just say you walk into an old church and you smell mold. That's going right up into the center of your brain, right? Your nostrils go right into the center of your brain. Smell information is information that your body takes in. If you smell like a certain cookie that your grandma used to bake, like it makes all these memories. When you smell, it goes right in, gets processed by the limbic center, which makes some of those emotions and reactions. So this is why when we get re-exposed to things, we do get real inflammation. That's real. But we also get panicked because the brain is like, oh, our enemy has re-entered and it's freaking out, and your blood pressure may go up. It's a real thing. You get real inflammation. So you may have rage, you may have a headache, that kind of thing. Twitching could start up. And if you've been living in a moldy home, you may not really smell it, but that's what's happening all the time. The body's getting that information. The reactions can be a little dulled because your body's like, we're living with an enemy. Okay, we're just going to try to cope and keep her functioning. So those are some of like the emotional reactions that can happen right there, and some of the adrenaline reactions. And now let's say the mycotoxins in particular, they can break down the blood-brain barrier. They can cross into cells. They can penetrate the brain, which is not supposed to really be penetrable, right? That's why it has a barrier. But this great little enemy can break down that barrier. It has a fatty component or a water component. It can enter anywhere. So one area it enters is the hypothalamus, which is also right in the center of your head there. You know, a very convenient place for mold to go immediately. It can become chronically inflamed. And now you're signaling for hormones throughout the body is off. And this can be sex hormones. You can have low sex drive, weight gain, spotty periods, low metabolism. But hormones control like so many things in the body. So when that is suppressed, many symptoms can come from that. And then it can penetrate other areas of the brain. So thinking, reasoning, remembering, areas of the brain can become shrunken or swollen, depending on where it lands. And there are scans for this, and there's testing for blood-brain barrier permeability. Sometimes the testing is great, gives you more information. But if you've been exposed to mold for a long time and you are having poor recall, anxiety, twitching, loss of muscle mass, you can basically assume the blood-brain barrier is penetrated and there's some mycotoxins in your brain. To me, like, that's all pretty fascinating and informative. Just knowing that little bit, you're like, oh, that sounds pretty bad, right? Mold can inflame your hypothalamus, which can mean like low hormone production, but there's more to it.
Yeah, and it's funny. I've changed the way that I speak to clients after I talk to people like you, because I learn stuff and then I try to pass that along to do what we're doing right now, help people understand what's happening and what needs to happen. So at first, I think when people think of breathing, you're like, I breathe in my lungs. And then you're like, okay, that's all that I do. And then more recently, there's been an understanding of the connection between breathing straight to your gut, because you could breathe straight into your gut and you can impact that. So then it's like, now you got like two paths that you could get into. But now when you're breathing, you could be breathing straight into your brain as well. Like
yes.
you're saying.
I mean,
Yeah.
you do breathe through your mouth, so to speak, and into your lungs. Your lung is another barrier system that can break down. But yeah, no matter how it's getting into the bloodstream, your bloodstream is nourishing your brain, and the blood-brain barrier is supposed to protect you from pathogens. But when that barrier is compromised, you can potentially have toxins be entering, and maybe nutrients not getting in either. So when that barrier is inflamed or leaky, you're getting that gut barrier breakdown and you're getting that brain barrier breakdown. They're like brothers. The gut barrier, you may be able to feel, so to speak, a little more because you're getting digestive symptoms. You can't really feel your brain. Even though we all know the brain is in charge of us, like we forget, right? The brain is an organ, just like all your other organs. So if you're saying like, oh, my gut's off or my adrenals are off, it's like, that's true because mold can penetrate those, but it's also the command center is being affected. For instance, one symptom a lot of people have, or a few, are like nausea, constipation, indigestion. And yes, some of that is because your gut's off, but some of that's because just your brain and your nervous system isn't signaling correctly anymore to move things along in that system. So that's one sort of error I see people make in treatment, is just forgetting like the brain is in charge of that movement.
Yeah, that's actually a good thought, because you're right. Your gut is your gut, your brain is your brain, but the brain really is in charge of all of it. But the thing, like specifically, you're talking about the brain controls other things. Mycotoxins are affecting how your brain is communicating to your intestines and stuff, and like how to move food down,
Yes.
basically. So it's not moving it well enough.
100%. Yeah. The body does not want bacteria to pile up in the small intestine. And I was just talking to a coach who works on our team, and she said 90% of our clients are constipated. It's just that lack of movement. So you do need to work on healing the brain and be using substances that keep things moving. People think they're not constipated because they drink coffee or they take a bunch of magnesium so that things are moving. But what if you didn't? Then you're constipated. So constipated means you haven't had a bowel movement in over 24 hours. So at the minimum, you need 1 bowel movement a day. But when you're detoxifying, you actually ideally want to have 2 or 3 bowel movements a day, right? Because you want more chances for that stuff to get out, especially when you're actively detoxing. It's just going to give you more energy for the fight, so to speak.
How would I feel a hormone imbalance or deficiency? Obviously, you could do tests, but what if you're just doing like inventory on yourself?
Low hormone production definitely has a thyroid connection. I'll tell you some typical thyroid symptoms. A lot of it does overlap with mold toxicity. Sleeping a lot, can't lose weight would be 2 big ones. It could be your eyebrows are thinning, your hair is falling out, you're constipated, cold hands and feet, foggy brain. You can't always go like right down the list. We're all a little different.
So like understanding what's happening at the front end is super important. Like the reality is that you're not dealing with a mold issue in your body or a mycotoxin issue or all these side effects that we've been talking about for any other reason than you're being exposed to something and it's building up in you. Right. If you weren't being exposed to it and it wasn't building up in you, then you wouldn't have to be going down this road.